At the Mexican Grand Prix, Max Verstappen broke the record for the most wins in a season. He has been very dominant throughout this whole season, winning 14 of the 22 races that we've had so far this season, and there's still 2 races still to go. Vettel and Schumacher held the record for the most wins, being 13 in the whole season, but of course, back then there were fewer races in a season. This record by Max is still very impressive, and no matter what he does from now on, he will be in the record books for years to come. So let's go and take a look at Max Verstappen this season from race to race to see how dominant he has really been. Going into the start of the season, coming off the back of his first World Championship, many people believe that Red Bull may fall behind to the rest due to them putting a lot of focus onto 2021. However, in pre-season testing, there was a lot of talk about how Red Bull and Ferrari would be the 2 top teams. And they were very much right. Going to Bahrain, Verstappen lined up P2 and was having a steady race fighting with Leclerc for a few laps, but Ferraris just had a superior pace. However, after the safety car restart towards the end of the race, Verstappen had a fuel pump error, meaning he would DNF alongside his teammate Sergio Perez, so it was a disaster for Verstappen and Red Bull. But the next weekend in Saudi Arabia, Max and Charles would have a great fight that would go all the way down to the checkered flag, in which Max would just get the edge over, showing that Red Bull is very quick and they can win the championship without engine issues. However, another issue would happen for Max in Australia, where Leclerc would go on and get his first ever Grand Slam, whilst Max was very far back behind Leclerc. He would again have another engine issue which would put him out of the race for the second time in the first 3 races. Many people already called Max out of the championship, but would he be able to come back and win the biggest point deficit in Formula 1 history? Going to Imola next, and here Red Bull and Verstappen would dominate with them getting their first 1-2 of the season, whilst Max was over 16 seconds ahead of Perez. Also, Leclerc would lose a huge amount of points after hitting the wall and finishing in P6. Next, we went all the way to Miami, where once again Leclerc would start in pole position, but Verstappen would come home and restart the charge for the title and win the race after Ferrari locked out of the front row. The next round in Spain was the biggest turning point in the championship battle, with Leclerc starting on pole and leading the race convincingly, all whilst Verstappen would spin. It seemed like an easy win for Charles, right? Well, you're wrong. He would have an engine failure and Red Bull would take their second 1-2 of the season, and Verstappen made a huge points jump towards Leclerc. Next up, we would go to the Monaco Grand Prix, and here Max would actually have one of his poorest weekends, where he would start P4 whilst Perez started in P3, and he looked much better than Max this whole weekend. Then, somehow, Ferrari would not win the race and Perez would, while Max sat in P3 just ahead of his closest rival in Leclerc. So not a dominating weekend, but a weekend in which he still finished ahead of his closest rival. Off to Baku now, and here Red Bull would again finish 1-2 whilst both the Ferraris would have engine issues, and this put Max further ahead in the title fight, as it was 2 wins in 3 races, and in both wins Leclerc DNF'd. To further show how dominating Verstappen was, he would finish over 20 seconds ahead of Perez in P2, who is of course in the exact same RB18. And on this weekend, many people thought it'd be very hard for Ferrari to come back into the fight due to how good Red Bull and Verstappen looked. The Canadian Grand Prix would be Max's 3 wins in 4 races, all whilst Leclerc was not even on the podium. In this race, Charles would take a grid penalty, meaning he started at the back of the grid, but would come back and finish in P5, but for Verstappen he had to work very hard to hold off Sainz in the final few laps, but once again he took his 6th victory in just 9 races. The next 2 races would be quite disappointing for Max's high standards that he has had the whole season. At the British Grand Prix, Max would suffer some damage to his floor that lost him a lot of time each lap, but he was still able to finish in P7 while Leclerc finished in P4. So even though this was an annoying race for Max, it was damage limitation. In Austria, which is the second sprint weekend of the season, Max would win the sprint, but Leclerc would take home his third win of the season and his first win since Australia earlier in the season, showing how much Verstappen was dominating even though Ferrari has the better qualifying car. Now, the French Grand Prix was the start of pure dominance for Verstappen. Here, he would win due to Leclerc crashing out in P1 and finishing 10 seconds ahead of the Mercedes. Hungary is one of Verstappen's best drives of the season, considering the circumstances. He would start in P10 due to an issue with the engine in Q3. He would come up the field to get to P1, spin, lose the lead and regain it and win by 7 seconds, whilst the Ferrari disaster class unfolded. I think that's the best way to describe that one. At the Belgian Grand Prix, Verstappen was starting P14 whilst his teammate was on the front row. He then went on to finish ahead of his teammate by 17 seconds, who was in P2. This performance was unbelievable and dominant from start to finish. To start that far back and win the race by that margin is unbelievable. His home race, he of course would win, but Mercedes had the advantage with Hamilton, but once again the RB18 and Verstappen were rapid and went on again to win another race. In Monza, Max would take another grid penalty that made him start further back, but he would go on to win the race before the safety car came out. His lead was just unbelievable. These past races were a sight to behold and showed how good of a driver Max is when he gets the car to do what he wants it to do. However, Singapore would be the end of this 5-win race streak. He would have an issue in qualifying, which meant he would start further back due to a fueling issue on his last Q3 run. Max would also have a dreadful race and would struggle to overtake due to the very narrow track. Max would have to box an extra time due to him going for an overtake on his very good mate Lando Norris and locked up all of the tyres and flat spotted them, and he would go on and finish P7 while his teammate Sergio Perez won the race. So still a successful race for the team. In Japan, Verstappen could win the title, and after the long red flag we would get a half-length race, and here Max Verstappen showed he is one of the best wet weather drivers in the world. In just after half a race distance, he would pull a 27-second lead over P2. This race was when Max was in a league of his own, and nobody on that day came even close. After the race, there was a lot of confusion. 4 points were awarded, and Max would confusingly get told that he is a 2-time world championship by Johnny Herbert. He well and truly deserved the title, as nobody has come close to him this season. Back in the United States, Max would win, but this was not easy as his team had an 11-second pit stop, which meant he had to make that time back and overtake Leclerc and Hamilton. Well, it was pretty straightforward, and he eventually put in the lap times and won the race with a 5-second gap to the Mercedes of Hamilton, showing how good he really is. And here, Red Bull secured the Constructors' Championship, with them winning all but 4 races so far this season. In Mexico, Max Verstappen would win his record-breaking 14th race of the season in pretty easy fashion with no real worry. In 2022, he was unbelievable and also picked up the record for the most points scored in a season with 2 races to go as well. This record is immense, however, due to Schumacher and Vettel achieving 13 wins in less races in a season. Max has to win the next 2 races in Brazil and Abu Dhabi to have a higher win percentage throughout a season due to us racing 22 races this season. Of course, the record books will say that he has the most wins in a season, and looking back on it, it was never in any doubt. Will Max win the next 2 races in Brazil and Abu Dhabi to break another record? Make sure to leave what you think in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching this video, and make sure to drop a like and subscribe to hear even more awesome Formula 1 content.